My daughter banned me from her wedding, so I canceled the venue I paid for. So I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. My daughter, Laura, she's 28 now, blocked me from her own wedding. Let that sink in for a minute. I was blocked from a wedding that I was literally paying for. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but I figured sharing this here might help me sort things out, or at least let me vent a little. First off, let me just say this. Laura has always been a bit of a handful. Even when she was a kid, we had our ups and downs. But what parent and kid don't, right? Still, I never imagined things would go this far. I mean, yeah, we've had disagreements in the past, but nothing that would make me think she'd go this extreme. Anyway, I'll try to keep this as clear as possible. Laura has been with her fiancé, Matt, for a few years now. They're not exactly rolling in money, so when they started planning the wedding, I offered to cover the costs. Seemed like a nice gesture, and honestly, I wanted to help them start their marriage on the right foot. I know weddings are expensive as hell, and since they were struggling, I figured why not? It was my way of showing support. I was happy to do it, and I thought she'd appreciate the help. It's a big moment, right? Your daughter's wedding, the day your kid steps into a new chapter of life. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but maybe a little gratitude would have been nice. But things started going sideways not long after that. So fast forward a bit. The wedding planning is well underway, and Laura seemed to have everything under control. I wasn't too involved in the little details. Honestly, I wasn't trying to micromanage her wedding. I trusted she could handle it. But one day I thought it'd be nice to add my brother, Mark, to the guest list. He and Laura have always been close, and I figured it wouldn't be a problem. Just one more person, right? No big deal. I called up the wedding planner to ask if they could add Mark, and that's where things got weird. The planner sounded kind of awkward when I asked. He hesitated and then told me the guest list was full. Full? How is that possible? It's a wedding, not a movie premiere. You can always squeeze in one more, right? So I pushed a little, thinking maybe he misunderstood or there was a mistake. Finally, after some back and forth, the planner sent me the guest list. And let me tell you, when I opened that list, my heart stopped for a second. I wasn't on it. Neither was Linda, my wife. I'm sitting there, staring at this list of people I barely know, but my own name isn't there. Not mine. Not Linda's. At this point, I'm beyond confused. I thought, there has to be some mistake. I mean, how could my own daughter leave me off the list for her wedding? Especially when I'm the one footing the bill. It didn't make any sense. So I called the planner back, trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I asked him straight up, why aren't we on the guest list? Did Laura forget? The planner hesitated again and then dropped the bomb. He told me that Laura specifically instructed him not to invite me or Linda, and on top of that, she requested extra security to make sure we couldn't even enter the venue if we tried. I sat there stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter was planning her wedding behind my back, and she went as far as hiring security to keep me out. I mean, what the hell? At this point, I'm livid. I asked the planner to show me proof because this has to be a misunderstanding, right? Maybe there was a miscommunication or something. But nope. He forwarded me the emails, and there it was, in plain black and white. Laura had been planning this for weeks, and she made it clear that I wasn't welcome. I didn't know what to do. I felt completely blindsided. All this time, I thought I was doing something good for her, helping her out, supporting her, and she's actively keeping me from her wedding? I can't even begin to explain how hurt I was. But what hit me the hardest wasn't just being left off the guest list. It was the fact that she planned it this way. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip-up. She went out of her way to make sure I wouldn't be there. And for what? Because we had a few arguments over the years? Because I didn't always agree with her choices? That's part of being a parent. You try to guide your kids, even when they don't want to hear it. I kept thinking back to all the times I supported her. When she got in trouble in school, when she was hanging with the wrong crowd, when we had to deal with some really tough situations, I was always there. Even when she was angry at the world, I tried to be the one she could count on. And now, she's shutting me out of one of the biggest moments of her life, and I don't even get to know why. I don't want to come off as the victim here, but it felt like a slap in the face. A really cold, calculated slap. I've seen her go through phases where she'd be mad at me for something small, but she usually came around. This felt different. This felt permanent. After getting off the phone with the planner, I just sat there, staring at the email. I must have read it 100 times, hoping I'd see something that would make it all make sense, but nothing did. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But mixed with the anger was a deep sadness. It's hard to describe, but there's this feeling you get when you realize your own child doesn't want you in their life. It's like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't shake it. I kept trying to figure out what I did to deserve this. What could have pushed her this far? Sure, we've had our share of disagreements, but I never thought it would come to this. Blocking me from her wedding? Making sure I couldn't even show up if I wanted to? It's like she was punishing me, but for what? I wish I had some big conclusion to this part of the story, but I don't. That's where I was left, stunned, confused, and heartbroken. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about something much deeper, and I had no idea how to fix it. All right, so after getting that guest list and seeing my name nowhere on it, I was fuming. I couldn't just sit around with that information and do nothing. I mean, how was I supposed to act like everything was fine after finding out my own daughter had blocked me from her wedding? I knew I had to confront Laura and figure out what the hell was going on. There was no way I could just let this slide without getting some answers. So I tried calling her. No response. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. This went on for the whole day. I get it, she's busy with wedding prep and all, but I was desperate for some clarity. At this point, I couldn't tell if I was more angry or hurt, but I needed to talk to her. I left her a voicemail asking her to call me back. Nothing, just silence. That silence was driving me crazy. After a day or two of no response, I hit my breaking point. If she wasn't going to come to me, I'd go to her. So I got in the car and drove over to her apartment. It wasn't far from where I live, and honestly, I didn't even think about what I was going to say. I just knew I needed to talk to her face to face. I figured maybe she could explain, maybe we could talk it out. Or maybe I was being naive, thinking she'd have some reasonable explanation for all this. When I got to her place, I was buzzing with adrenaline. My head was full of all the things I wanted to say, but at the same time I wasn't sure what to expect. I knocked on the door, and after what felt like forever, Laura opened it. She looked at me like she wasn't even surprised I was there, like she'd been expecting this confrontation. That pissed me off even more, but I tried to stay calm. No need to go full-on crazy right at the start, right? We stood there for a second, and then she just asked, "What do you want, Dad?" Like I was some kind of stranger showing up uninvited. I told her straight up, "I want to know why my name isn't on the guest list. Why the hell would you block me from your wedding?" She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said something like, "I thought you'd figure it out eventually." That just made me angrier. I asked her again, trying to stay calm, but my voice was definitely shaking by this point. "Why, Laura? Why would you do this?" Her response? "It saved you the trouble of showing up." She said it so casually, like this whole thing was no big deal. I was standing there ready to explode, and she was acting like it was just another Wednesday afternoon. "I'll send you the pictures if I have time," she added, with this dismissive shrug. That's when I lost it. I couldn't hold back anymore. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I yelled. I was shaking, full of this mix of rage and heartbreak. I mean, after everything I'd done for her, this is how she treats me? I couldn't wrap my head around it. How does a daughter block her own dad from her wedding and then act like it's no big deal? But it didn't stop there. She had more to say, and none of it was good. She started listing out all these reasons for why I deserved to be left off the guest list. She said I never took her side, that I was always against her, that I'd flaunted Linda, my wife, her stepmom, in her face. She even brought up stuff from years ago, things I thought we'd moved past. She talked about times when she needed me to stand up for her, and I didn't, like when she was fighting with her cousin or when she got into trouble at school. Now, I won't lie. There were times when I couldn't defend her. She wasn't always in the right, and I wasn't going to support her when she was clearly wrong. I tried to explain that to her, but she wasn't having it. She was convinced that I'd been against her for years, that I'd abandoned her, and that this whole wedding thing was just payback. She even brought up stuff from when she was younger, like the time we had to deal with her getting caught with pills. Yeah, she had her rough patches, but I was there for her. I supported her through all of that, even when it was hard. I didn't turn my back on her when she needed help. I tried to guide her, get her the help she needed, and make sure she stayed on track, but apparently none of that mattered. In her mind, I had failed her in every way that counted. Standing there, listening to her unload all this anger, I realized how deep the resentment ran. It wasn't just about this wedding. It was years of built-up frustration that I didn't even know she was holding on to. And the way she was throwing it all at me now, like it was my fault she was so messed up, was just too much. At some point, I started tearing up. I didn't even mean to. It just happened. I asked her, practically begging, "What did I do that was so terrible, Laura? Why are you treating me like this?" I hoped deep down that maybe she'd show some sign of regret or empathy, that she'd soften, even just a little. But no, she stayed cold. "You never had my back," she said. You were always more concerned with your new life with Linda. You didn't care about me. That hit like a punch to the gut. I tried to explain to her that I always cared, that I loved her more than anything, but she was convinced I'd chosen my new family over her. I didn't know what to say. I was standing there in her apartment doorway, trying to figure out how we got to this point. She didn't want me at her wedding. She didn't want me in her life, apparently. And nothing I said was going to change that. It felt like we were speaking two different languages. Every time I tried to explain myself, she'd throw something else back at me, like she'd been keeping a list of all the ways I'd failed her over the years. Eventually, she told me I was just bringing negativity into her life, and that I needed to leave. She said I wasn't welcome at the wedding, or in her life, if I couldn't accept that. I walked out of there completely defeated. I didn't know what else to do. My own daughter didn't want me at her wedding, and no matter how much I tried to understand why, it all came back to this resentment she'd been holding on to for years. I was lost, hurt, and honestly more confused than ever. After I left Laura's apartment that day, I was wrecked. I didn't know what to do or where to go from there. The whole confrontation felt like it went nowhere, and everything she said just kept playing over and over in my head. I tried to keep it together, but I felt completely blindsided by her level of anger toward me. I mean, I knew we weren't super close, but to find out she thought so little of me, that hit hard. A few days went by after that, and I still hadn't heard from her. I was trying to give her space, hoping maybe she'd come around or at least calm down enough to talk rationally. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. The wedding was coming up fast, and I didn't know if I was supposed to just sit there and pretend everything was fine. I couldn't do that. I was at home with my wife, Linda, telling her everything that went down. Linda's always been patient with Laura, way more patient than I've been, but even she was done at this point. She said it was time for me to stop letting Laura walk all over me. She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make Laura happy, to keep some kind of peace between us, but nothing ever seemed to be enough. It was like no matter what I did, I couldn't win. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I couldn't just keep funding a wedding that I wasn't welcome at. I mean, think about it. I was paying for this huge celebration, covering everything from the venue to the food, and I wasn't even allowed to attend. It felt ridiculous. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Laura didn't care. She didn't care that I was hurt. She didn't care about all the money I'd spent. She didn't care about anything except herself. So I picked up the phone and called the wedding venue. I told them to cancel everything. I knew I wasn't getting my deposits back, but at that point, I didn't care about the money. It wasn't about that anymore. I just couldn't stand the idea of her going through with this wedding while I was being treated like I didn't exist. I had to take a stand, even if it hurt. The venue manager was shocked when I told him to cancel. I guess it's not every day someone pulls the plug on a wedding like that, especially so close to the date. But I didn't hesitate. I told him to go ahead and call off the caterers, the decorators, everything. I even considered canceling the wedding planner too, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to give Laura too much time to find a backup plan. I figured if I canceled just enough, she'd be left scrambling. Now, I know what some people might say, that I was being petty, that I should have just let her have the wedding and dealt with the aftermath later. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect. I was her father, and she had treated me like I didn't matter. I wasn't going to sit back and let her use me. I wasn't going to keep being her doormat. After I made the call, I sat down with Linda and we talked it over. She supported my decision 100%. She said something I'll never forget. If she doesn't respect you enough to invite you to her wedding, she doesn't deserve your money. And she was right. I had bent over backward for Laura for years, always trying to be the bigger person, always giving in. But enough was enough. The next day, things really started to unravel. The wedding planner called frantic, saying they couldn't get into the venue to start setting up. Apparently, the venue staff had already started clearing out everything. When Laura found out, I can only imagine her reaction. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard from a friend that there was absolute chaos. Guests were confused, vendors were showing up with no place to set up, and nobody had any idea what was going on. Laura tried calling me, of course, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't in the mood for another screaming match, and frankly, I didn't owe her any more explanations. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I knew she'd be furious, but after everything she'd put me through, I didn't care. She could figure it out on her own. That evening, she actually showed up at my house. I wasn't really surprised. Laura's not the type to just let things go, but I wasn't about to have a face-to-face confrontation with her again. I needed space, so I had already taken the precaution of changing the gate code so she couldn't just waltz in whenever she wanted. I wasn't hiding from her or anything, but I didn't want to let her storm in and tear into me. I'd had enough of her words. She pounded on the gate for a while, yelling for me to come out. I just sat inside, listening, but not responding. There was nothing more to say. She'd made it clear where we stood, and this was me making it clear that I wasn't going to keep letting her take advantage of me. Eventually, she gave up and left, but I knew this wasn't over. I talked to my parents later, and they weren't exactly thrilled with how I handled it. They kept saying things like, "You can't be this harsh with your own kid, and parents shouldn't abandon their children no matter what." I get where they were coming from, but they didn't see what I'd been dealing with all these years. They didn't see the constant disrespect, the entitlement, the way she had treated Linda and me. They thought I was being too harsh, but I wasn't going to change my mind. I wasn't going to let Laura's actions slide anymore. The whole thing left me feeling conflicted, though. On one hand, I knew I had done the right thing by standing up for myself. But on the other hand, this was my daughter. No matter how much she had hurt me, there was still this nagging feeling of guilt in the back of my mind. I kept thinking, did I go too far? Should I have just let her have the wedding and dealt with everything later? But then I remembered how she had looked me in the eye and told me she didn't want me there. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep bending over backward for her anymore. So, yeah, that's where things ended up. Laura's wedding plans were in shambles, and I was left wondering if there was ever going to be any kind of reconciliation. But at the end of the day, I had to protect myself. I had to protect my own peace, even if it meant losing my daughter in the process. And honestly, I don't regret it. After the whole mess with canceling the wedding, I expected some kind of fallout, but I didn't realize just how fast everything would unravel. The day after I canceled the venue, the wedding planner called me up in a complete panic. He started off all formal, trying to explain the situation, but it was obvious he was freaking out. The venue had already started shutting things down, and the caterers and decorators were locked out. Apparently, when they got to the venue that morning, security showed them the email I sent about the cancellation, and that's when everything went sideways. He was calling to ask if there was any way to salvage the situation, but I wasn't interested in playing nice anymore. I told him straight up, "I'm not paying for anything. The wedding's off as far as I'm concerned." He stammered a bit, trying to reason with me, but I wasn't budging. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to be bullied into changing it just because everyone else was freaking out. The planner kept going on about how the vendors needed to be paid and how there was still time to sort things out if I just covered the remaining costs. I cut him off and told him it was no longer my problem. "You'll have to talk to Laura about that," I said, and hung up. A part of me felt bad for the guy. He was just doing his job. But this situation wasn't my mess to clean up anymore. Laura had made it clear that she didn't want me involved, so I was done being the one to fix everything. Now, what happened next? I didn't find out until much later, but apparently, when Laura showed up at the venue and found out it was canceled, she absolutely lost it. I'm talking full-blown meltdown. From what I heard, she showed up expecting to see everything set up and ready to go, but instead, the place was empty. No tables, no decorations, no caterers, nothing. Just a locked gate and a confused security guard telling her she couldn't enter. She tried to call me again, of course, but I'd already blocked her number. I wasn't going to deal with another screaming match. I guess she must have thought I was bluffing or that I'd cave at the last minute. But when she realized I was serious, things really escalated. The venue security told her she couldn't come in, and that's when she snapped. From what I've been told, she started screaming at the security guards, demanding they let her in. She even threatened to sue the venue, which, let's be real, wasn't going to get her anywhere. At one point, she tried to force her way in. And that's when the guards called the cops. If it weren't for Matt, her fiancé, showing up when he did, I'm pretty sure she would have been arrested for trespassing. He managed to calm her down just before things got really out of hand. But by then, the damage was done. Her perfect day was officially ruined. Now, while all this chaos was going down at the venue, I was at home, just waiting for the inevitable knock at my door. I knew Laura wasn't the type to let something like this go, and sure enough, she showed up later that afternoon. She was banging on the gate, yelling for me to come out, but I stayed inside. I'd already decided there was no point in having another confrontation. We'd said everything that needed to be said. I could hear her yelling, telling me how I'd ruined everything and how I was being selfish. Part of me wanted to go out there and try to talk to her, to explain why I did what I did, but another part of me knew it wouldn't make any difference. Laura had made up her mind about me a long time ago, and nothing I said was going to change that. So I stayed inside, letting her rant until she eventually gave up and left. After she was gone, I sat down with Linda, and we talked about what had happened. Linda, as usual, was supportive. She kept telling me that I'd done the right thing. that it was about time I stood up for myself, but I couldn't help feeling conflicted. On one hand, I knew I had to put my foot down. Laura's behavior had been out of control for years, and this was the final straw. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt that came with knowing I'd been the one to ruin my own daughter's wedding. As the days went by, word started to spread through the family about what had happened. I hadn't told anyone yet, but apparently Laura had gone and told her side of the story to anyone who would listen. Pretty soon, I was getting calls from relatives, asking me why I'd done it, why I couldn't just let her have her day. My parents especially were disappointed. They didn't agree with how Laura had treated me, but they still thought I should have just let the wedding happen and dealt with everything afterward. I tried explaining to them that it wasn't just about the wedding. This was years of resentment and disrespect all coming to a head. I couldn't keep being the one to fix everything, especially when she didn't want me there in the first place. But they didn't get it. To them, it was just another case of a parent and child having a falling out, something that could be patched up with time. But to me, it felt like something way bigger. This wasn't just a temporary fight. It felt like a breaking point in our relationship, and I didn't know if there was any coming back from it. The rest of the week was quiet. Laura didn't try to contact me again, and I didn't reach out either. I was trying to give myself some space to process everything, but no matter what I did, the guilt kept creeping back in. I kept thinking, was I too harsh? Should I have just sucked it up and let the wedding happen? I talked to Linda about it again, and she reminded me of all the times Laura had walked all over me, all the times I'd given in just to keep the peace. She was right. I'd spent so many years bending over backward for Laura, trying to make her happy, and where had that gotten me? Shut out of her wedding, blocked from one of the most important moments of her life. At some point, enough is enough. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd made a mistake. Not in standing up for myself, that part I was sure of, but in the way I went about it. Canceling the wedding like that without any warning? Maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe if I'd tried one more time to talk to her, we could have avoided all this. But then I'd remember how she looked at me during that last confrontation, how cold and dismissive she was, and I knew there was no reasoning with her. This wasn't just a small argument. This was the result of years of pent-up anger and resentment, and it was clear she wasn't going to back down. So yeah, that's how the wedding fell apart. It wasn't pretty, and it sure as hell wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, I had to stand my ground. And while I still felt guilty, I knew that I couldn't keep letting her walk all over me. The fallout was messy, but it was necessary. Update. A week ago, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Laura's husband, Matt. It got tense to think if some mishap had happened to her. He said that she was fine, but she wanted to meet me in person. It came as a surprise to me. I asked him the reason, but he said he would tell me when we met. You said he was in the city, and if I was free, we could meet up for dinner. I said okay. I secretly wished that it was a meeting to reconcile Laura and me. I thought she wanted to meet me but was ashamed to face me. So Matt was being the middleman. I went. There was so much hope. After all, I'm a father, right? To my dismay, Matt was alone. I asked about Laura. He said he doesn't know. My heart sank, and I asked if something had happened to her and if she was fine. He told me that they were separate. He went on to reveal how Laura had been abusive in her marriage. She had real anger issues and would throw stuff at Matt and break the household stuff. Even in a minor argument, he tolerated her until he could. And when the situation got worse, he got separated from her. He said that Laura had a psychological issue and that she blamed others for any inconvenience that happened to her. She constantly used to fight with him because they had to leave the city and shift there because he got better opportunities there. Laura did not lose anything with this change. She also got a similar paying job in that city. Yeah, she was angry with him for taking her away from her hometown. That was just one thing. Laura used to be always angry at Matt and fight with them. He said that there was one more reason why he wanted to meet me in person. He wanted to say sorry. He said he witnessed Laura's cruelty towards me, Linda on my parents. But he did not intervene because Laura had manipulated him against all of us. He said that he brought misery upon himself by overlooking all the red flags. I said it was not his fault at all. It was Laura's fault. And to some extent, maybe mine, because I was not able to raise her properly. I also said sorry to him because of whatever he had been through with Laura. Matt requested me for one last favor. You said Laura had been destroyed by the separation. She's begging him to take her back, but he has fallen out of love with her because of her abuse. Yet he wishes well for her. He asked me if I could reach out to her and support her during the bad times. She literally had no friends because she lost everyone thanks to her temper. She has no real permanent friend in her life. She asked me to take her to therapy or something. I said I wish I could, but she wouldn't let me come near her. He understood my circumstances, and I understood his. We both wanted to help Laura, if at all. She would let us do so after knowing that I couldn't help but go to meet Laura. It turned out to be as expected. She dropped explosions on me and Linda, though I showed up alone. I didn't want Linda to witness Laura's wrath. I apologized to her to calm her down. I didn't think about right and wrong at that time. She was going through a rough time, and I wanted to help her out. I said she could curse me whatever she wanted, but she needed to see a therapist first. She didn't listen and dug up the past. She yelled that she hated Linda to the extent that she wanted to kill her. She said that she blocked us from her wedding because she was embarrassed to introduce Linda as her stepmom. She was ashamed of her and was ashamed of me for marrying her. She didn't listen to me and chased me out of the house. She blamed me for all of her miseries in life. I don't know if I was right or wrong, and honestly, I don't care. I want her to come out of this, but I don't know how to help her. Update. Thanks for all the moral support. I was very disturbed while making the last update. The space really helped me release my nerves. Linda suggested that I take the help of Laura's best friend from school. Her family was her neighbors, so we knew each other quite well. She was now living in South Africa. I reached out to her on social media and told her about the situation. I requested her to contact Laura, and if she opened up to her, I was betting that she would because she was the only one with whom Laura never had a fight. She assured me that she would help me and convince Laura to go to therapy, and gladly she did. Laura is going to therapy, and I'm guessing is going well because a week ago she met my parents and apologized to them for her misconduct. She confessed that her hatred grew so badly she was unable to control it, but she also said that she was never going to forgive me and still blames me for everything. I don't despise her anymore. I just wish her a good life, even if I'm not part of that. Thanks for all the support. I wish no father had to go through this when your child hates you to this level. My daughter left claiming her stepdad is the real man she deserves, as her father. Man, where do I even start with this? I guess I should go back to when things really fell apart. So, last year, Maria, my ex-wife, and I finalized our divorce. We had been together for, 16 years? Yeah, 16. Anyway, things hadn't been great for a while, but I always thought we could work through it. I mean, every couple has their problems, right? Turns out I was wrong. Real wrong. Maria was having what she called an emotional affair with this guy from work, Brian. And honestly, I'm not even sure what the hell that means. Like, it wasn't physical, at first anyway. But she was out there telling this dude things she should have been talking to me about. You know, all the intimate stuff. Her feelings, frustrations, hopes, whatever. It's like she built a relationship with him while we were still married. I can't say I was shocked when she finally came clean about it, but it felt like I had been punched in the gut when she told me she wanted to be with him now. Anyway, we ended up splitting up, and the divorce went through pretty fast. I just wanted it to be over with. The only thing that kept me going was my daughter, Lily. She's 14 now, but back then I still felt like we had a bond, you know? We were always close, or at least I thought we were. She was my little girl, my buddy. But after the divorce, everything between us changed. At first, I tried to keep things normal between us. I didn't say a bad word about her mom. I didn't want to be that guy. I figured Lily didn't need to hear about all the drama and pain Maria had caused me. So I tried to be the good dad, kept giving her gifts, took her out to do fun stuff, and didn't make her choose sides. But nothing I did seemed to matter. Lily was cold toward me, real cold. It was like she wasn't even my kid anymore. Every time I saw her, it felt like she had built this wall between us. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than realizing your own child doesn't want to be around you. I kept brushing it off at first, told myself, hey, she's just a teenager. She's going through her own stuff. Give her some time. But the more time passed, the worse it got. I remember one time I got her this necklace for her birthday, something she'd been wanting for a while. She took it, barely said thanks, and that was it. No smile, no excitement, just nothing. That hurt, but I kept telling myself she'd come around eventually. Then one day, it happened. The day that still messes with my head. We were sitting in the car. I think I had just picked her up from her mom's house. We weren't talking much, like usual, and out of nowhere, she says, you know, Brian's the dad I deserve, not you. I didn't even know how to react. I was stunned. Like, what the hell do you even say to that? I remember my throat tightening up, like I couldn't breathe for a second. I just kind of stared at her, waiting for her to say she was kidding or something, but she didn't. She just sat there looking out the window like it was no big deal, like she hadn't just shattered my entire world in one sentence. I pulled the car over to the side of the road because I didn't trust myself to keep driving after hearing that. I couldn't process it. My own daughter, telling me that this guy, this Brian dude, who had been in her life for, a few months, was a better father to her than me, the guy who raised her for 14 years. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I just sat there in silence, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to care. She just sat there scrolling on her phone like it was nothing, like I didn't matter anymore. I dropped her off at her mom's place without another word. I didn't even get out of the car. I just waited for her to leave, watched her walk away, and then I lost it. I got home that night and it all hit me at once. Everything. The divorce, the betrayal, my daughter siding with this new guy over me. It was like the whole world was collapsing around me and I had no way to stop it. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't. I just needed time to be alone and think. Well, more like not think, because every time I tried to figure out how it had come to this, I couldn't make sense of it. Lily's words kept playing in my head over and over. Brian's the dad I deserve. It was like someone had taken a knife and twisted it in my chest. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. Where did I mess up? How could the daughter I loved so much think so little of me? After a couple of days, I realized I had to make a choice for my own sanity. I couldn't keep going like this, trying to force a relationship with someone who didn't want it. As much as it hurt, I decided I needed to pull back. Emotionally, financially, all of it. I wasn't going to keep bending over backward for someone who clearly didn't care about me. That night, I sat down with all my financial documents and made the first big decision. I removed Lily as the primary beneficiary from all my accounts. That meant my life insurance, my 401k, everything. I know it sounds harsh, but at that moment, I realized I had to protect myself. If she didn't want me in her life, I wasn't going to keep putting her first. Instead, I made my sister Rebecca the beneficiary. Rebecca was the only one who really understood what I was going through. She'd been there for me through the divorce, listened to all my rants about Maria and Brian, and never judged me for any of it. She had been through her own tough breakup a few years back, so she got it. Once I made that change, I felt a little better, like I was finally taking control of my life again. I didn't owe Lily anything beyond what I was legally required to give her, and that's how I was going to handle things from now on. Just do the bare minimum until she turned 18 and then, well, I don't know what happens after that, but at least I'd be free from all this pain. After that conversation with Lily, things in my life started to change real fast. It wasn't like I wanted them to, but I knew that if I kept holding on, I'd lose myself. I mean, when your own kid basically says, I don't need you anymore, what are you supposed to do? I wasn't going to beg her to let me be her dad. I tried that for months, and it got me nowhere. So I made the decision to pull back, emotionally and financially. It was time to stop pretending everything would magically go back to how it was. I guess the first person I told about all this was my sister Rebecca. She's my rock, man. She's been through her own crap, so she always knows what to say. I remember going over to her place one afternoon and just laying it all out for her. I told her about what Lily said, how she's been cold ever since the divorce, and how I'd had enough of it. Rebecca wasn't surprised. She had warned me months ago that Lily was getting too close to Brian and Maria. She'd seen it happen before, kids picking sides when their parents split, even when it didn't make sense. But hearing her say, I told you so, didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it kind of made me feel worse, like I should have seen it coming and done something different. Look, Rebecca said, you've done everything you could. You've been a great dad, but if she doesn't want to see that, that's on her. You can't keep chasing her around trying to fix it. You got to take care of yourself now. And that's when it really clicked for me. I realized I couldn't keep pouring myself into a relationship that wasn't there anymore. So I went home that night and started making some big changes. It wasn't easy, though. The first thing I did was sit down and go through my financials. I took Lily off as the beneficiary for everything: life insurance, savings, even the small emergency fund I had tucked away. I wasn't going to just hand over my hard-earned money to someone who saw me as replaceable. Instead, I added Rebecca as my primary beneficiary. She was the only one who had been there for me through everything, so it just made sense. I also started pulling money out of the college fund I had saved for Lily. This one was tough. I'd been saving for her education since she was born. Every paycheck I'd set a little aside, thinking one day it'd help her get into whatever college she wanted. But now I couldn't see a future where she even cared about going to school, let alone having me pay for it. So, yeah, I pulled the money out. Not all of it at once, but enough to take a couple of trips and do something for myself for a change. It wasn't all selfish, though. I used some of the money on Rebecca, too. She deserves it. We went on a 2-week trip to Europe, just me and her. We saw Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. It was exactly what I needed to clear my head. I know it probably sounds harsh, spending the money I had saved for Lily, But honestly, it felt like I was reclaiming something that had been taken from me. When I got back from that trip, I felt different. Not exactly healed or anything, but more at peace with my decision. I wasn't sitting around waiting for Lily to change her mind about me. I was moving on. And to be honest, part of me thought maybe this distance would make her realize how much she was hurting me. Maybe, just maybe, she'd come around and apologize, or at least try to understand where I was coming from. But that never happened. Instead, I started hearing things from other people. My neighbor, for example, mentioned seeing Lily with Brian at some school event. He said she looked happier than he'd ever seen her. That stung a bit, but I wasn't surprised. Brian was doing all the things I couldn't, I guess. He was stepping into the dad role, whether I liked it or not. And it wasn't just at school. I started hearing about Brian taking her shopping, taking her to sports games, doing all the things I used to do with her. The more I heard, the more it confirmed that I'd made the right choice to step back. But even though I was moving on, I wasn't about to cut Lily off completely. I mean, I'm not heartless. I still paid child support, did all the legal stuff, and made sure she had what she needed. But the extra stuff? The emotional support, the gifts, the surprises? Nah, I was done with all that. I was done bending over backward to make her happy when she clearly didn't care about me. The strangest part was, Lily didn't even ask about the changes at first. I thought she'd notice right away that I wasn't sending her gifts anymore, or that I wasn't texting her to check in as much. But weeks went by and I didn't hear a word. I guess she was too busy with Brian and her mom to notice or care. It was like I had become a ghost in her life, and she didn't even realize it. But then, everything blew up. It was a Saturday evening when it happened. I was just sitting at home, catching up on some work when my phone buzzed. It was Lily. She wanted to come over and talk. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, so I figured maybe this was it. Maybe she was ready to have a real conversation. Maybe things could get better. But when she walked through the door, I could tell right away something was wrong. She had this look on her face, like she was angry but trying to hold it in. I didn't even get a chance to ask her what was going on before she dropped a bomb on me. "I know what you did," she said, her voice shaking with anger. I was confused. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I know you took me off your accounts," she spat out. "And I know you've been spending the college fund. How could you do that to me? That money was for my future." I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't expected her to find out like this, especially not so soon. But there she was, standing in front of me, hurt and angry, demanding answers. I could have lied, made up some excuse, but what would that have accomplished? She deserved the truth, even if it hurt. "Yeah, I made some changes," I admitted. "But you need to understand, Lily. You told me Brian was the father you deserved. You made it clear you didn't want me in your life anymore." Her face turned red with frustration. "I never said I didn't want you. I was angry, but you're still my dad." I shook my head. "You didn't act like it, Lily. You pushed me away and I had to protect myself. I'm still here doing what I'm supposed to do, but I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." She didn't like that answer. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, any hope I had of fixing things seemed to vanish. I sat there in the silence, wondering if I had made the right decision, but knowing deep down that I didn't really have a choice. Update 1. So after that last argument with Lily, things were pretty tense. I didn't hear from her for a while, and I wasn't exactly rushing to reach out either. Honestly, I was tired. Tired of the back and forth, tired of trying to fix things that just couldn't be fixed. But that didn't mean I was prepared for what happened next. A few months went by, and I'm thinking, maybe this distance is what we both need. Maybe some time apart will help us figure things out. I'm focusing on work, seeing my sister Rebecca more, trying to get my life back together. I wasn't expecting to hear anything from Lily. Then one evening, out of nowhere, she shows up at my door. I should have known something was up just from the way she was standing there, arms crossed, with that look on her face like she was ready for a fight. I barely got the door open before she was already inside, pacing back and forth in my living room like she owned the place. "All right, what's going on?" I asked, shutting the door behind her. She spun around and glared at me. "You know exactly what's going on. Why did you do it?" Now I'm still trying to figure out what she's talking about, but it didn't take long for her to spill it. "You took me off everything," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "The accounts, the college fund, everything." "What the hell, Dad?" I won't lie, that stung. Even though I knew she had distanced herself from me, hearing her call me Dad in that moment hit different. Like, after all this time of pushing me away, now she wants to pull the dad card? But I kept my cool. I knew this conversation was coming eventually. "Yeah, I made some changes," I said calmly. You said Brian was the dad you deserved. You made it clear you didn't need me in your life anymore. She rolled her eyes. Oh, stop. I was mad. I didn't mean that. But this is a whole other level. You're taking away my future. That's when it clicked. It wasn't about the relationship between us. It wasn't about her missing me or feeling like I wasn't there for her. No, this was about the money, the college fund, the accounts, everything I had been saving for her future. She was pissed because she found out that I'd been using it for myself and for Rebecca. Lily, I didn't just wake up one day and decide to cut you off, I told her. You made your choice. You chose your mom. You chose Brian. I had to protect myself. You're supposed to be my dad, she shouted, her voice cracking a little. You're supposed to take care of me no matter what. That's when I lost it a bit. I didn't yell, but I definitely wasn't as calm as before. Take care of you? I tried, Lily. I tried for months after the divorce to keep us close. I never badmouthed your mom. I never said a single bad thing about Brian, even though he was the reason your mom and I split up. I was there, trying to be the dad you say I'm supposed to be, and what did I get for it? Nothing. You pushed me away at every turn. You acted like I didn't exist. So yeah, I made changes. I had to look out for myself because no one else was. She looked shocked, like she wasn't expecting me to push back. I guess she thought I'd just roll over and apologize, but that wasn't happening this time. I was done with that. I didn't push you away, she yelled back, but there was less fire in her voice now. I was just trying to figure things out. Figure things out? I shook my head. You didn't even give me a chance, Lily. You chose Brian the second you found out about him. You didn't just side with your mom. You erased me from your life. We both stood there, the silence filling the room. I could tell she was trying to process what I was saying, but I wasn't sure if she was really getting it. I mean, how do you explain to your own kid that they hurt you so much that you had to cut them off just to keep your sanity? Eventually, she sat down on the couch, looking more defeated than angry now. So that's it? You're just done with me? I sighed and sat down across from her. I'm not done with you, Lily. You're my daughter, and I'll always love you. But I can't keep putting myself in a position where I'm constantly being hurt. I'm still here, doing what I have to do, but I'm not going to pretend like everything's fine when it's not. She stared at the floor, not saying anything for a while. Then she finally looked up at me. What if I want things to go back to the way they were? That question hit hard. I wanted to say yes, that I'd do anything to fix things. But the truth is, too much had changed. There was no going back to how things were before the divorce, before Brian, before all of this. Lily, I said carefully, we can work on rebuilding things, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort from both of us. I'm not just going to jump back in and pretend like none of this happened. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't really satisfied with that answer. I don't think either of us was. But it was the best I could offer. I couldn't go back to being the dad who just gave and gave without getting anything in return. After a few minutes, she stood up to leave. I need to think about all this, she said quietly, not making eye contact. Take all the time you need, I replied, trying to stay calm, even though part of me was screaming inside. She walked to the door, paused for a second like she was going to say something else, but then just left without another word. And that was it. Another confrontation, another unresolved conversation. But this time, it felt different. There was no door slam, no angry outburst. Just silence. I sat there for a long time after she left, thinking about everything. I wanted to believe that maybe this was the start of something better between us, but honestly, I didn't know. I'd been let down so many times that it was hard to have hope anymore. All I knew was that I had to stick to my decision. I couldn't go back to how things were before. If she wanted a relationship, she'd have to meet me halfway. And if not, well, I'd done all I could do. The rest was up to her. Update 2. So, after Lily left my house that night, I thought maybe things were finally starting to calm down. We had the confrontation, said what we needed to say, and I figured she'd take her time to think things through. I didn't expect some miracle where she'd call me the next day, but I thought the worst was behind us. But of course, I was wrong. Because a few days later, I got a call from someone I really wasn't looking forward to hearing from, Maria. Now, to be fair, we've kept things pretty civil since the divorce. Mostly because we had to for Lily's sake. We weren't friends or anything, but we weren't screaming at each other either. But this call? Yeah, this one wasn't civil at all. It was a Thursday night, and I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen when my phone started ringing. I saw her name on the screen and immediately had that sinking feeling in my gut. Like, why would Maria be calling me now? She never calls unless it's about something serious, and I was not in the mood for more drama. But I picked up, and right away, she starts in with the attitude. Why are you doing this to our daughter? That's how she opened the conversation. No hello, no how are you, just straight into accusations. I sighed and leaned against the counter. What are you talking about, Maria? She huffed like I was supposed to know exactly what she meant. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Lily came home upset because you took her off your accounts. She's been crying for days, saying you don't care about her anymore. Now, at this point, I'm already annoyed. Not because Lily's upset. I mean, I get why she's hurt, but because Maria's acting like I'm some kind of villain here. Like I just woke up one day and decided to hurt my daughter for fun. Maria, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, I made those changes because Lily made it clear she didn't want me in her life. She's been pushing me away for months. What was I supposed to do? Just keep pretending like everything's fine? She cut me off before I could even finish. You're supposed to be her father. You don't just get to cut her off like that. She's your child. And there it was. The guilt trip. I knew it was coming, but it still hit hard. Because yeah, Lily is my child, and yeah, I still love her. But that doesn't change the fact that she's been treating me like garbage for the better part of a year. I am her father, I replied, trying not to raise my voice. But being her father doesn't mean I have to keep giving and giving while she treats me like I don't exist. I've done my part, Maria. I've tried to keep a relationship with her, and she shut me out. This isn't about the money. This is about me protecting myself. There was a long pause on her end. I could hear her breathing, probably trying to figure out what to say next. But instead of calming down, she came back even angrier. Protect yourself? She snapped. What are you talking about? She's 14, for God's sake. She's confused, and you're punishing her for it. You're supposed to be the adult here, not the one making her feel worse. Now, I don't know what it is about people saying, you're supposed to be the adult, but it always sets me off. It's like they're saying I'm not allowed to have feelings because I'm the dad. Like I'm just supposed to take whatever crap gets thrown at me because that's what adults do. I have been the adult, Maria, I shot back. I've been trying to be there for Lily since the divorce, and what has she done? She told me Brian was the dad she deserved. She told me she didn't need me anymore. How am I supposed to keep pretending that doesn't hurt? She didn't answer that. Instead, she went for a different angle. This is all because of Brian, isn't it? You're jealous that she's close to him, and now you're punishing her for it. That one made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Of course, she thought this was about Brian. In her mind, everything had to come back to him. I was just the bitter ex-husband, jealous that the guy she cheated on me with was now playing dad to my daughter. This has nothing to do with Brian, I said firmly. This is about me and Lily. It's about how she's treated me ever since you brought him into her life. I'm not punishing her. I'm doing what I need to do for my own sanity. She sighed, and I could tell she was getting frustrated. Lily's hurting right now. She's a kid, and she doesn't know how to handle all of this. And you're just making things worse. She thinks you don't love her anymore. That one stung. Not because I thought it was true, but because it showed how much damage had been done. I do love Lily. I always have. But how do you show love to someone who doesn't want it? How do you keep reaching out when every time you try, they slap your hand away? That's not true, I said quietly. I've never stopped loving her, but I can't keep letting her hurt me either. I have to draw a line somewhere. Maria was silent for a minute, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand. But then she said the thing I was dreading. If you don't fix this, you're going to lose her forever. I could feel my chest tighten. Because that was my biggest fear, even if I didn't want to admit it, losing Lily for good. But I also knew that I couldn't just roll over and do whatever it took to make her happy. That's not how relationships work. I don't want to lose her, I said, my voice low, but she has to meet me halfway. I can't be the only one trying here. Maria sighed again, but this time it sounded less angry and more tired. I just don't want to see her hurt anymore. She's been through enough. And there it was. The part of me that understood. I didn't want to see Lily hurt either. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore how much she had hurt me. It wasn't fair for Maria to act like Lily was the only one struggling here. I get it, I said. But you've got to understand my side of this too. I'm doing what I think is best for both of us. I'm still here for her, but I can't keep pretending like nothing's wrong. There was a long pause before Maria finally spoke again. All right, I'll talk to her. But you need to be ready to fix this when she's ready to talk. I wasn't sure what fixing this would even look like, but I agreed. I'm ready, whenever she is. And with that, the call ended. I stood there for a while, just staring at my phone, wondering if I had made the right choice. I didn't know if things would ever be fixed between Lily and me, but at least now, there was a glimmer of hope that maybe we could start over, someday. Update 3. After that call with Maria, I thought maybe things would start shifting. Like there'd be some kind of progress or something, even if it was small. I had told her everything, my side of things, why I did what I did, why I needed to protect myself, and while she wasn't thrilled, at least she said she'd talk to Lily. So, I waited, and waited, but nothing happened. Days went by, and I heard nothing from either of them. It was frustrating. On the one hand, I knew I had made my choice. I had set boundaries, and those boundaries were important to me. But on the other hand, there was still this huge part of me that was hoping Lily would come around. Maybe she'd show up one day and say she understood, or at least that she wanted to talk. But that day never came. Instead, I got another surprise. One afternoon, I got home from work, and there was an envelope on my doorstep. No note, no return address, just an envelope with my name on it. I brought it inside, figuring it was some kind of official paperwork or bill, but when I opened it, my heart sank. Inside was a letter from Lily. I don't know why, but my hands were shaking when I opened it. I guess part of me was scared of what she might say. Maybe it was going to be a hate-filled letter about how I'd ruined her life. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Either way, I wasn't prepared for what I read. The letter wasn't long. In fact, it was pretty short and to the point, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. Dad, it started. I've thought a lot about what you said. I don't agree with everything, but I get that you're hurt. I'm hurt too. I don't know how we got here, but I don't think we can fix it. I've decided to move in with Brian and Mom full time. I won't need you anymore, and I'm changing my last name to Brian's. This is what's best for me. That was it. The letter ended just like that. Simple, cold, and straight to the point. She didn't want me anymore. She didn't need me anymore, and she was making it official by taking Brian's last name. I sat there at the kitchen table for what felt like forever, just staring at the letter. My mind was racing, but my body felt like it was frozen. She was gone. Just like that. I mean, I knew things were bad between us, but I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't think she'd actually go as far as to take his name, to literally erase me from her life. The worst part? I didn't know how to respond. I'd spent so long fighting for her, trying to keep her in my life. But now she was making it clear she didn't want that. She had made her choice. Brian was the dad she deserved, not me. I didn't call her. I didn't call Maria. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, staring at the letter, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. What do you even do when your own kid tells you they are done with you? For the next few days, I felt like I was in a fog. I went to work, did what I had to do, but it felt like I was on autopilot. Every time I thought about the letter, I got this tight feeling in my chest. I couldn't shake the idea that I had somehow failed. Maybe if I had done things differently, if I had fought harder for our relationship, if I had given more, maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this. But then, Rebecca came over one evening. She noticed something was off right away, and of course, I ended up telling her everything. I showed her the letter, expecting her to say something like, "It's going to be okay," or "You'll work things out eventually." But she didn't. Instead, she just looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "You didn't fail, you know." I looked at her confused. "What are you talking about? Of course I failed. My own daughter doesn't want me in her life anymore." Rebecca shook her head. "No, you didn't fail. You did everything you could. You gave her space, you set boundaries, and you tried to have a relationship with her. But at the end of the day, she made her own choice. This isn't all on you." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But it's hard to shake the feeling that you've somehow screwed up when your kid chooses someone else over you. Still, what Rebecca said made sense. I had done what I could, and Lily had made her decision. It wasn't my job to fix everything, especially when she wasn't willing to meet me halfway. Over the next few weeks, I started to accept that this was the reality now. Lily was gone, and I had to move forward. I wasn't going to chase her down or beg her to come back. I'd already done that, and it didn't work. She had made her choice, and I had to live with it, no matter how much it hurt. But then, just when I thought things had finally settled down, I got another call. This time, it wasn't Maria. It was Lily. And this time, it wasn't a confrontation or a fight. It was worse. "Dad," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. I need help." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. After everything, after the letter, after the decision to take Brian's name, after all of it, she was calling me, asking for help. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to shut her out, just like she had done to me. Part of me wanted to tell her she had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. But the other part of me, the part that's still her dad, no matter what, knew I couldn't do that. "What's going on, Lily?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. There was a long pause before she finally spoke. "It's Brian. He's not who I thought he was. I don't know what to do." And just like that, everything changed again. The guy she had chosen over me, the guy who was supposed to be the father she deserved, suddenly, he wasn't the hero anymore. Suddenly, she needed me again. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were. But for the first time in months, I felt like there was a tiny sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Maybe we could finally start to fix things. But this time, I wasn't going to be the one doing all the fixing. If Lily wanted me back in her life, she was going to have to put in the effort too. So, after that call from Lily, my head was all over the place. I mean, it was the first time in what felt like forever that she actually reached out to me, needed me. But it wasn't exactly what I expected. She wasn't calling to fix things between us. She was calling because she needed help with Brian. And honestly, I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Part of me was relieved she reached out at all, but another part of me was still hurt. Was she only coming to me because things had gone wrong with Brian? I didn't get much detail from her on the phone. She just said Brian wasn't who she thought he was. I didn't push for answers right then. Instead, I told her we could talk in person. She agreed to come over the next day, and that gave me a night to sit and stew over what this was really about. The next morning, I was pacing around my house like a crazy person, waiting for her to show up. My mind kept going in circles, thinking about everything that had happened between us. I wasn't sure if this was the beginning of us fixing things or just another mess I'd have to deal with. Either way, I knew I had to be ready for whatever she was about to drop on me. When she finally got to the house, I could tell something was off right away. She looked different. Not just sad or upset, but kind of shaken. She wasn't her usual guarded, angry self. She sat down on the couch without saying much, and I sat across from her, waiting for her to start. She didn't look at me at first. Instead, she stared at her hands like she was trying to figure out how to say whatever was on her mind. Finally, she spoke, and when she did, her voice was quiet. "Brian's not who I thought he was. He's been lying to all of us." I tried to stay calm. "What do you mean? What's going on?" She took a deep breath, still not looking at me. "He's been hiding things from my mom and me. Money stuff, job stuff, just everything. I don't even know who he really is anymore." I didn't say anything right away. I just let her keep talking because honestly, I didn't want to make this about me. As much as I had been hurt by her choosing Brian over me, this wasn't the time to rub it in her face. She needed me to listen. Lily kept going, telling me how Brian had been lying about his finances for months, pretending like everything was fine when really he was in a lot of debt. Apparently, he had been using money that wasn't his and keeping it a secret from both her and Maria. Now everything was starting to fall apart, and they didn't know what to do. "I trusted him," she said, finally looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "I thought he was better than you, and now everything's just falling apart." That hit me hard. Not because of the comparison, but because this was the first time she had admitted to being wrong. And while part of me wanted to feel vindicated, I didn't. I just felt sad for her. Because as much as I wanted to say I told you so, I knew that wasn't going to help. She was already dealing with enough. "Lily," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "I'm really sorry you're going through this, but you need to know that no matter what, I'm still here for you. I always have been." She didn't say anything for a minute, but then she nodded, wiping away her tears. It wasn't the dramatic reunion I had imagined, but it was a start. Maybe this was the moment we'd finally begin to heal things between us. Maybe now, with Brian out of the picture, we could actually rebuild our relationship. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was a small chance we could move forward. Together. On my 16th birthday, parents drop a bombshell. "You're moving in with your aunt, no questions asked." So, let me set the scene for you. I had just turned 16, and like any normal kid, I thought I might get a birthday cake. Maybe a lame gift. Something simple, right? Nope. What I got instead was a ticket out of my own house. Literally. My parents didn't even sugarcoat it. They told me, point blank, that they needed my room for the baby. My sister Carla, the golden child, is pregnant, and suddenly, I'm out of there. It wasn't like a discussion or anything. It was like a quick meeting with HR where they tell you you're fired. No emotions, no second thoughts. They just sat me down, looked me straight in the face and said, "You're going to live with Aunt Lydia." I didn't even get a say. I couldn't believe it. It was my birthday, and they couldn't even wait until the next day to throw me out. Now, I've always known Carla was the favorite, okay? She's 22, expecting a baby, and for as long as I can remember, she's been the center of their world. But this? I mean, I wasn't expecting much for my birthday, but getting kicked out of my own room to make space for her unborn baby? Yeah, that's a new low. They didn't even try to soften the blow, no. Hey, we know this is tough, but we love you, or anything like that. Just, we need your room for the baby, pack your stuff. And I didn't get it at first, like, okay, fine, Carla's pregnant, but we have a guest room. Why can't they just turn that into the nursery? When I asked, they just kind of looked at each other, then finally came out with it. Matt needs a place to stay too. Matt, Carla's boyfriend. The guy's like 25 and has his own place. But somehow, my parents decided he needed to move into our house too. So yeah, the guest room went to him, and the baby, my room, and me, shipped off to Aunt Lydia's like an old piece of furniture no one wants anymore. I guess I could have fought harder, but what's the point? I've been dealing with this kind of crap my whole life. I've learned to expect nothing from them, because every time I've hoped for even the tiniest bit of love or attention, they let me down. This wasn't a surprise. It was just another reminder that to them, I'm always going to be second place to Carla. Always. The worst part? Carla didn't even bother showing up for this family meeting. I mean, yeah, I get it. She's pregnant and probably didn't want to deal with the awkwardness, but still. It's not like we ever had a super close relationship, but this? It felt like she was just too okay with me being booted out to make space for her new little family. Like, she couldn't even face me while our parents were basically kicking me out of my own home. When I went upstairs to pack, it didn't feel real. I mean, I'd spent my whole life in that room. Every crappy little birthday I'd had, every time I tried to avoid my parents' drama, I'd go up to that room and just zone out. And now, just like that, it wasn't mine anymore. I started throwing stuff into a suitcase, not even sure what I was packing. It felt weird, like I was moving out of my life, not just my room. And it wasn't like my parents helped or anything. They just watched, like they were waiting for me to hurry up so they could get on with their day. They offered to drive me to Aunt Lydia's like it was some kind of favor. I could have walked, honestly, but at this point, I was too tired to fight it. So I just let them drive me. The whole time in the car, they acted like we were on some normal trip. My mom was talking about dinner plans, like she hadn't just told her son he wasn't welcome in his own house anymore. When we finally pulled up to Aunt Lydia's, there was no emotional moment or anything. They didn't even pretend to care. Just a quick, "Here we are, see you later," before they drove off. Aunt Lydia, on the other hand, looked at me like I was some stray dog that had been left at her doorstep. Not in a bad way, more like she was about to take me in and give me the love I'd been missing out on my whole life. She hugged me as soon as I got out of the car. The difference between her and my parents was so obvious. She actually cared. I could feel it. She didn't even need to say anything, but when I told her what happened, she was furious. When I laid it all out for her, the birthday, the eviction, the baby room stuff, she couldn't believe it. I think at first she thought I was exaggerating, but once I told her the whole story, she got quiet, like she was processing the level of messed up that this situation was. Then, without saying a word to me, she grabbed her phone and walked into the other room. I couldn't hear much, but I knew she was on the phone with my dad because her voice went from calm to super angry in about 2 seconds flat. And that's not like Aunt Lydia at all. She's usually so chill, the type of person who never raises her voice. But whatever my dad said to her must have really pushed her buttons, because I've never heard her yell like that before. When she came back, her face was still red, and she looked pissed. She sat down, took a deep breath, and told me what had gone down. Apparently, my dad had told her that I wanted to move out, that I was excited to stay with Aunt Lydia for a while, like I'd volunteered to give up my room for the baby. That's why Aunt Lydia didn't question anything when they asked if I could move in. She thought I was the one who wanted to leave. I just sat there, stunned. I mean, I always knew my parents weren't great, but this, lying to my own aunt to make themselves look better, that was a whole new level of low. Aunt Lydia apologized to me over and over again, saying she would have never agreed to it if she knew the truth. She said she couldn't believe my parents would treat me like that, and that I was welcome to stay with her for as long as I wanted. Honestly, I didn't even know what to say. It felt good to be somewhere where I wasn't treated like garbage for once, but at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about how messed up my parents were. They didn't even care about me enough to tell the truth. They just wanted me out of the way, and they didn't care how it happened. I went to bed that night in Aunt Lydia's spare room, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to walk on eggshells around anyone. I wasn't scared of what mood my mom or dad would be in or worried about Carla getting all the attention. It was peaceful. But there was this weird, empty feeling too, like I'd lost something important, even if that something wasn't that great to begin with. In the end, I guess getting kicked out wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to me. At least now I was with someone who actually gave a damn. But still, it hurt. Knowing that your own parents would rather lie and shove you out of the house than deal with you, that sticks with you. All right, so I'm living with Aunt Lydia now, and I gotta say, it feels weird. Not in a bad way, but it's just different, you know? I mean, I've lived my entire life under my parents' roof, even if it was a crappy situation most of the time. And now, here I am, in a house where someone actually wants me there. It's almost too much to handle. Aunt Lydia has been super welcoming, like, she's really trying to make sure I feel at home. The first couple of days, she went out of her way to make me feel comfortable, like making me breakfast, asking if I wanted to redecorate my room, stuff like that. It's nice, but honestly, it felt strange at first. I'm not used to anyone caring about what I want. I was so used to just fading into the background at home, and now suddenly here's someone paying attention to me. But I'll admit, it took me a while to get used to it. Like, the first morning after I moved in, I came downstairs and Aunt Lydia had made this huge breakfast. I'm talking pancakes, eggs, bacon, the whole deal. She smiled at me and said, "I thought you could use a good breakfast to start the day." And I just kind of stared at it, like I didn't even know what to do with it. At home, I was lucky if I got a piece of toast before I ran out the door for school. I sat down, ate a bit, and Lydia kept asking me about my plans for the day. And honestly, I didn't have any. I was just trying to wrap my head around everything. The whole moving out thing, my parents not even bothering to check on me, it was all still sinking in. I mean, yeah, I didn't want to live with them anymore, but it's still weird to think about how fast they were willing to throw me out. After breakfast, Aunt Lydia had to go to work, so I was left alone in the house. That was another thing that felt strange. I was just there. No one telling me what to do, no one hovering over me or ignoring me like my parents did. It was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to constantly be on edge. So I decided to make a post online about my story just to get it out. But then, that afternoon, things got interesting. I was just chilling on the couch, minding my own business, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Now, keep in mind, this was like 2 days after they'd kicked me out, and they hadn't said a word to me since. So I was kind of curious to see what she had to say. The text? "We need to talk. That's it. No, how are you doing? Or are you okay?" Just a cold, robotic, "we need to talk." Honestly, I wasn't sure if I should even bother responding, but curiosity got the best of me, so I replied, "About what?" What followed was a bunch of texts from my mom about how I embarrassed the family by posting online. Apparently, some of my extended family had seen the post, and it had caused a bit of a stir. But instead of asking if I was okay, or maybe realizing how much they'd screwed up, my mom was more concerned about how it made her look. She kept saying things like, "Do you realize how this reflects on us?" And, "You've made things difficult for your father and me." I couldn't believe it. I sat there, reading the texts, just getting angrier and angrier. They kicked me out on my birthday, lied to Aunt Lydia about it, and now I'm the bad guy for telling the truth. I was done with it. I didn't even bother replying after that. I just threw my phone on the couch and tried to distract myself by watching TV. Later that evening, Aunt Lydia came home, and she could tell something was up. I guess I wasn't doing a great job of hiding how pissed off I was. She sat down next to me and asked if I was okay, and at first I didn't want to burden her with all this. But she's got this way of making you feel like it's okay to talk, you know? So I told her about the texts from my mom, how they were more concerned about their reputation than what they'd actually done to me. Aunt Lydia didn't even flinch. She just nodded and said, "That sounds exactly like your parents." I laughed a little because, yeah, it was spot on. Then she said something that really hit me. "You don't owe them anything, you know. You're not responsible for their reputation or how they feel. You're allowed to be angry." And that's when it clicked. I was angry. I'd spent so long just accepting the way things were, letting them treat me like crap because I thought that's just how it was. But now, I was done. I didn't owe them anything. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I started blocking out my parents more and more. I didn't respond to their texts, didn't even look at them after a while. They weren't going to get to me anymore. Aunt Lydia helped me with that too. She didn't say much, but just having her around, knowing she had my back, made everything easier. But things weren't totally calm yet. A few days later, I was at school, just trying to get through the day, when I noticed my parents had shown up. Yep, they actually came to my school like that was going to fix anything. I saw them standing outside the gate, waving me over like nothing was wrong. My first instinct was to ignore them, but they were pretty loud, and my friends started noticing. I felt my heart pounding. Like I didn't want to deal with this drama in front of everyone. But my friends? They had my back. A few of them literally formed a circle around me, like they were some kind of human shield. It was kind of funny, but also super reassuring. I wasn't alone in this. Eventually, I had to go over and talk to them. I walked up, keeping a safe distance, and said, "What do you want?" My mom started going on about how I wasn't answering their calls or texts and how they were worried about me. I almost laughed. Now they were worried? After kicking me out and ignoring me for days? Then they dropped the real reason they were there. My grandparents, the ones with all the money, had found out about what they did to me, and now my parents were freaking out because they were scared of losing their inheritance. Yeah, that's what this was about. Not me. Not my well-being. Just money. They didn't care about fixing things with me. They just wanted to make sure they didn't lose their precious payday. I stood there staring at them, not even knowing what to say. It was like everything I'd always suspected was laid out in front of me. They didn't care about me. They never had. And now they were only trying to reel me back in because it benefited them, not me. I told them I wasn't coming home. Not now, not ever. And then I turned around and walked away. Their voices faded behind me as I rejoined my friends, who were all watching the whole thing go down. I don't know what my parents did after that. I didn't look back to find out. All I knew was I was done with them. Completely done. And for the first time, I felt free. When I got back to Aunt Lydia's that day, I told her everything. She wasn't surprised. She said something like, "It's always about money with them." And she was right. But you know what? It didn't matter anymore. I had Aunt Lydia, and I had people who actually cared about me. That's all I needed. Update 1. So, after the whole school confrontation with my parents, I thought maybe things would settle down. You know? Like they'd get the message that I wasn't coming back and we could all just move on. But of course, that would be way too simple for my life. A few days went by and I was feeling pretty good. Aunt Lydia was being her usual awesome self, making sure I was comfortable and all that. It was like the first time in forever that I wasn't constantly stressed or waiting for the next bad thing to happen. I'd even started to get into a routine, school, hanging out with my friends, coming back to Aunt Lydia's place, and just chilling. Things felt normal, or at least as normal as they could be after getting kicked out of your house. But then, the drama found its way back in, like it always does. It started with a message from Carla. I hadn't heard much from her since the whole eviction thing, other than that one text asking to talk, which I had pretty much ignored. But this time, she was blowing up my phone. Like, text after text. At first, I didn't even want to open them, but curiosity got the best of me. I mean, we were siblings. Maybe, just maybe, she was trying to make things right. Turns out, not really. Her text started off super casual, like she was trying to ease into something. "Hey, how are things at Aunt Lydia's? Hope you're doing okay?" Stuff like that. Then, out of nowhere, she drops this. "Mom and Dad are really upset. They think you're being unfair by not talking to them." Unfair? Really? I couldn't believe it. How was I the one being unfair here? I was the one who got kicked out. I was the one who got lied to. And now, somehow, I was the bad guy for not running back into their arms? I didn't reply right away. I needed to process it. I wasn't even angry at this point, more like exhausted. It was like every time I thought I'd escaped the drama, they found a new way to drag me back in. I was pacing around the living room trying to decide what to do when Aunt Lydia walked in. She took one look at me and knew something was up. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting down on the couch. I showed her the text from Carla and she just shook her head. "They're trying to guilt trip you. Classic." And yeah, she was right. My parents were pros at the guilt game, and it seemed like they'd roped Carla into it now. But what really got to me was the next part of Carla's message. She said, "You know, it's not too late to fix things. If you come home, we can all move past this. Mom and Dad are ready to talk." Move past this? Like what? Pretend it never happened? Go back to living in a house where I didn't matter? Where I was just the extra kid they barely tolerated? No thanks. Aunt Lydia must have seen how frustrated I was getting because she put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't owe them anything. You know that, right?" And that's when it hit me. I didn't owe them anything. I didn't need to fix things. I didn't need to go back to that toxic situation just to make them feel better. It was like this weight lifted off my chest, and I realized I could actually say no. I could choose not to go back. I grabbed my phone, ready to respond to Carla, but then I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? I didn't want to come off as harsh, but I also didn't want to let her think I was caving to their guilt trip. So I kept it simple. I'm not coming back. I'm happy here. I hit send and waited. And waited. She didn't reply right away, which was honestly a relief. I was tired of the back and forth. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, but no. Not even close. A few hours later, my phone buzzes again. This time, it's my mom. She sent this long message about how I was tearing the family apart and how I needed to come home to make things right. It was filled with all this guilt-heavy language about family bonds and forgiveness, like I was the one who needed to apologize. I couldn't believe it. My mom was actually trying to make me feel bad for standing up for myself. She went on and on about how it was time to let go of the past and move forward together. But all I could think about was how they never once took responsibility for what they did. They never said sorry for kicking me out, never admitted they were wrong. All they cared about was making it look like everything was fine again. I was about to respond when Aunt Lydia chimed in again. Do you really need to reply to that? And she was right. I didn't. What was the point? It wasn't like anything I said was going to change their minds. They weren't looking for an actual conversation. They just wanted me to fall back in line. So I didn't reply. I blocked my mom's number. I know it sounds harsh, but I was done playing their game. I was done letting them mess with my head. The next day at school, I felt weirdly free. Like I'd finally broken away from all the nonsense. My friends were supportive too. They knew what was going on and kept checking in on me, making sure I was okay. It was nice having people around who actually cared. But of course, my parents weren't done. Later that week, Aunt Lydia got a call from them. I wasn't in the room, but I could hear bits and pieces. My dad was talking about family responsibilities and being mature, which was pretty ironic coming from the guy who literally kicked his kid out to make space for his grandkid. When Aunt Lydia hung up, she looked at me and said, "They're still trying to get you to come home, but don't worry, I shut it down." She told them straight up that I wasn't going back and that they needed to stop pushing me. She even threatened to get a lawyer involved if they kept harassing me, which I didn't even know she could do. But apparently she was serious about it, and honestly, that made me feel safer than I had in a long time. So, that's where things stand now. My parents have gone radio silent since Aunt Lydia's threat, and I haven't heard a peep from Carla either. It's been quiet, almost too quiet, but I'm not complaining. For once, I feel like I have control over my life, and that's something I never thought I'd have. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe my parents will give up and leave me alone, or maybe they'll keep trying to guilt trip me into coming back. But either way, I'm not going back. I've got Aunt Lydia, I've got my friends, and I've got a life that doesn't revolve around being ignored or mistreated. And for the first time, I'm okay with that. Update 2. So after all the drama with my parents trying to guilt trip me into coming home, things finally started to calm down a bit. Or at least I thought they did. I mean, it had been quiet for a while, too quiet. My parents went radio silent after Aunt Lydia's warning, and I hadn't heard from Carla since I told her I wasn't coming back. For a minute, I actually thought that maybe, just maybe, they'd backed off for good. But of course, nothing stays calm for long in my life. One evening, Aunt Lydia and I were just hanging out in the living room watching TV. It was one of those rare moments where I felt, I don't know, peaceful. Like everything was normal, or at least as close to normal as it gets. I wasn't thinking about my parents, school, or any of the usual crap. It was just me and Aunt Lydia watching some mindless show, and I was actually relaxed. Then my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first. I didn't want to ruin the moment, but it kept buzzing, over and over. Finally, I grabbed it and saw it was Carla. Again. At first, I thought it was going to be more of the same. Her telling me how unfair I was being, how I needed to talk to mom and dad, blah, blah, blah. But this time, the texts were different. She wasn't mad. She wasn't trying to guilt trip me. Instead, she was apologizing, like full-on apologizing. "I'm sorry for everything," she wrote. "I should have stood up for you." I stared at the screen, not sure how to react. I mean, after everything, why now? Why was she suddenly sorry? Then she kept going. "I didn't know they were going to kick you out. They told me you wanted to leave. I didn't think it would go this far." Now, that threw me off. I knew my parents lied about a lot of things, but I had no idea they'd lied to her too. Carla kept texting, explaining that our parents had spun some story about how I wanted to move in with Aunt Lydia, that I was totally on board with the whole thing. And she believed them. She even told me that she thought I was being selfish by not helping with the baby, which is why she didn't fight back when they kicked me out. She didn't realize how bad it actually was for me until she saw the stuff I posted online. It was a lot to take in. Aunt Lydia must have noticed the look on my face because she paused the show and asked, "What's going on?" I handed her the phone, not really sure what to say. She read through the texts. her face going from curious to a little surprised. Well, that's something, she said, handing the phone back to me. What are you going to do? And honestly, I didn't know. Part of me was still angry at Carla, even though I could see that she'd been lied to just like I had. But another part of me, well, I felt bad for her. She was in a messed up situation too, dealing with all the pressure from our parents, the pregnancy, the lies. Maybe she wasn't the bad guy I thought she was. So, I texted her back. I didn't jump right into forgiveness or anything, but I told her I appreciated the apology. I said I needed time to process everything, but that I wasn't mad at her anymore. That felt like the right thing to say, honest but not too harsh. Then Carla hit me with another bomb. She told me she was planning to move in with Matt, her boyfriend, and that she didn't want to live with mom and dad anymore either. Apparently, things had been getting really tense at home since I left, and she was feeling trapped. She said, "They're trying to control everything, and I can't take it anymore." That made me pause. For so long, I thought Carla was the golden child, the one who always got everything she wanted from our parents. But now, hearing her side of things, it sounded like she was just as much a victim of their control as I was. It was weird, like I'd been seeing everything through this one lens, and now that lens was cracking, and the truth was a whole lot messier than I thought. She kept texting, saying how she felt bad for not standing up for me sooner, how she wished she'd done something before it got to this point, and for the first time, I felt like maybe we were on the same page. Maybe we weren't enemies after all. That night, I didn't sleep much. I just kept thinking about everything, about how messed up our family really was. It wasn't just me versus them anymore. Carla had her own struggles, and even though she'd let me down before, she was trying to make things right now. That had to count for something, right? The next day, I decided to meet up with Carla. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I figured we needed to talk face to face, not just over text. We agreed to meet at this cafe downtown Neutral Territory, so it wouldn't feel like either of us had the upper hand. When I got there, she was already sitting at a table by the window, looking nervous. That was weird to see too, Carla, the confident one, actually looking anxious. I sat down, and for a few seconds, we just kind of stared at each other, not really knowing how to start. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm really sorry," she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know how bad it was for you. I was so wrapped up in my own stuff I didn't even notice." I nodded, not really sure what to say yet. It was hard to be mad at her when she was sitting there, looking genuinely sorry. I didn't know they were going to do that to you," she continued. "And when I found out, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix it." There it was. That guilt I knew she'd been carrying around. And maybe that was what I needed to hear. That she did feel guilty. That she knew she'd messed up. "I'm not mad at you anymore," I finally said. "I get it. They lied to you too. But I'm not coming back home, Carla. I can't." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I wouldn't expect you to. I'm leaving too. I can't live with them anymore. They're trying to control everything about the baby, about Matt and me. I just can't do it." We sat there for a while talking about everything, about our parents, about how things had gotten so bad, about what we were both going to do next. It was strange, but in a way it felt like we were finally on the same side. For the first time, I felt like Carla actually understood me. When we finally left the cafe, I didn't feel completely at peace, but I felt like we'd taken a step in the right direction. Things weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. For now, I was just glad that Carla and I were talking again, and that maybe, just maybe, we could start to fix what was broken. That night, when I got back to Aunt Lydia's, I told her everything that had happened. She smiled, nodded, and said, "Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom for people to see things clearly." And maybe she was right. Maybe Carla and I had both hit that point, but at least now we were climbing out of it together. Update 3. So after that meetup with Carla, things got, well, complicated, but also kind of clearer at the same time, if that makes any sense. I thought maybe after talking things through with her, we could just move on, go our separate ways, and leave all the family drama behind us. But, of course, that's not how life works, especially not in my family. A few days after I met Carla, Aunt Lydia and I were having one of our usual chill evenings. We just finished dinner, and I was getting ready to head up to my room when there was a knock at the door. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal, but Aunt Lydia never has visitors at night. Like, ever. She's a quiet person, and her friends usually drop by during the day. So both of us were a little thrown off by the timing. Aunt Lydia looked at me with this puzzled expression like, "You expecting someone?" I shook my head, and we both walked to the door. She opened it, and, surprise, there stood my parents. I could feel my heart sink. Like, really? After everything, they had the nerve to show up here unannounced and try to get me back into their mess? I thought they'd given up after Aunt Lydia's threat to get legal involved. But nope, here they were, standing on her porch like nothing had happened. My mom had that fake, concerned look on her face that she always pulls out when she's trying to manipulate me. My dad just stood behind her, looking awkward, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Can we come in?" my mom asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Aunt Lydia didn't even look at me before saying, "No, I don't think that's a good idea." I almost smiled at that. Aunt Lydia doesn't play around when it comes to setting boundaries. My mom's face dropped, and she sighed like she was the victim in all this. "We just want to talk to you, honey. Please." I wasn't having it. I'd been through enough, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their drama just because they suddenly decided they wanted to talk. I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's there to talk about? You kicked me out. You lied to Aunt Lydia. And now you just show up like everything's fine?" My mom's eyes got wide, and she stammered, "It wasn't like that. We thought it was best for everyone." Best for everyone? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You thought it was best to kick me out on my birthday because Carla's pregnant? Seriously?" My dad finally chimed in, his voice quiet. "We didn't handle things well, okay? But you need to come home." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Why? So you can keep pretending like I don't exist while you bend over backward for Carla and the baby? No thanks." Aunt Lydia, sensing things were getting heated, stepped in. "Look, I think it's best if you two leave. He's made it clear he's not coming back." My mom wasn't giving up that easily, though. She started tearing up, the classic guilt trip move she always used when things didn't go her way. "We're your parents. We love you. We want to fix things." But here's the thing. I'd finally realized something. They didn't want to fix things for me. They wanted to fix things for them. They wanted to sweep everything under the rug, make it seem like we were one big happy family again. Also, they wouldn't have to deal with the fallout of their actions. But I wasn't playing along anymore. "You had plenty of chances to fix things," I said, my voice low but firm. "But every time you chose Carla. You chose her over me over and over again. So don't stand here and act like you care now." The silence that followed was heavy. My mom just stared at me, the tears still in her eyes. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. I wasn't going to be guilted into going back to a house where I was nothing more than an afterthought. My dad looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he just sighed and put a hand on my mom's shoulder. "Let's go," he muttered. My mom looked like she wanted to protest, but after a few seconds she turned and walked back to the car. Her shoulders slumped. My dad followed her without another word. Aunt Lydia closed the door, locking it behind them, and turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded. But the truth was, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was relieved. It felt like I'd finally stood up for myself, for real this time. But another part of me felt, I don't know, sad. Like no matter what I said, no matter how much I tried to cut them off, they were still my parents. And it sucked knowing they were always going to choose Carla over me. But that's the thing, isn't it? Family doesn't always mean what we want it to mean. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Later that night, I got a text from Carla. She said our parents had told her about what happened and that she was sorry they had tried to force me back. She wasn't on their side this time, though. She said she understood why I didn't want to come home and that she was moving in with Matt, like she'd told me before. She ended the text with, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." And you know what? That hit different. Coming from Carla, the one person I'd always thought was part of the problem, hearing her say that made me realize I wasn't alone in this. Maybe we weren't as close as some siblings, but we were starting to get there. I showed the text to Aunt Lydia, and she smiled. "You've come a long way, you know that?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't the same kid who'd been kicked out on his birthday. I'd learned to stand up for myself, to choose what was best for me, and not just go along with what other people wanted. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet house, sunlight streaming in through the windows, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells, just me, in a place where I was wanted. And that felt pretty damn good.
It was a typical evening when I first realized something was wrong. The house was quiet, but a strange unease lingered in the air. I had been at work all day, and the moment I stepped inside, I could feel the tension thickening. My husband, Sam, was sitting in the living room, flipping through his phone. My mother-in-law, Karen, was nowhere in sight. I had learned to expect her presence, often hovering like a shadow, though it was usually in the background, unnoticed. I had been planning to spend some time with Sam, but that plan quickly faded when I walked past my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and the mess inside was far beyond anything I would ever leave. Clothes were strewn across the floor, books scattered on the bed, and papers were piled on the desk. It wasn't just a mess. It looked like someone had been rummaging through my things. It didn't take long for me to realize that someone had intentionally gone through my room. I didn't need to guess who. As I stepped closer, my heart sank. I could already feel the pit forming in my stomach. My thoughts immediately went to the one thing that mattered most: the watch. It was my grandfather's, an heirloom that had been passed down through generations. It had a sentimental value that no amount of money could ever replace. And now, it was gone. Without hesitation, I stormed into the living room and grabbed Sam's arm. "Come with me," I ordered, my voice barely containing the frustration and panic swelling inside me. He raised an eyebrow, but followed me to the bedroom, looking confused. When he stepped inside, his eyes widened at the disarray. He didn't need to ask, it was obvious. He had never seen my room like this. But when his gaze shifted to my face, I could see a flicker of something else. Surprise, maybe? He was caught off guard by the chaos. But then again, he didn't know what I knew. My eyes locked with his. "Did you see this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Did you see what's been done here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the mess, then at me, before glancing toward the door. It was then that I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Karen standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "Did you do this? Did you ransack my room?" She didn't react like someone caught red-handed. Instead, she shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that made my blood boil. "It's just a little mess," she said, as though it were nothing. "I forgot to clean up. I'll do it later. No big deal." No apology, no acknowledgement of her actions. It was as if she already knew what I would find. She had no shame, no guilt. My suspicion grew stronger by the second. But it wasn't just about the mess. It was about the watch, the one thing that was now missing from my life. "Mom?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where's my watch?" Her response came quickly, and it was more defensive than I expected. "What watch? I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I want your old watch?" she snapped. I couldn't let it go. I knew she had taken it, but I needed her to admit it. "You were in here," I said, my eyes narrowing. "You've taken things before. You can't deny it. You've been in my room and you've taken things." Sam looked uncomfortable. "Karen, why don't we just let it go? Maybe it's just a mix-up." I couldn't believe my ears. Sam, my husband, was defending her again. It was like he always did, turning a blind eye to his mother's behavior and protecting her at all costs. I had endured it for so long, but now it was too much. I needed answers. I needed justice. I needed my watch back. "No, Sam," I said, my voice cold. "This is not a mix-up. This is my watch, my family's legacy, and it's gone. She took it, and I'm not letting this go." Sam's face flushed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of hesitation. He opened his mouth to speak, but didn't. It was like he didn't know which side to choose. That moment of silence spoke volumes. It was then that I made up my mind. "You've gone too far," I said, turning back to Karen. "Where is my watch? I want it back, now." Karen crossed her arms, her face tight with annoyance. "I don't have it," she insisted, her voice rising in anger. "I told you, I don't know where it is. Why are you accusing me like this?" I could feel the rage building inside me. "I know you took it," I said, pointing a finger at her, "and I'm not leaving until I get it back." Sam tried to intervene again, his tone patronizing. "Karen didn't do anything wrong. You're overreacting. I think you owe her an apology for making these accusations." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had happened, after she had gone through my personal belongings, he was asking me to apologize to her? The betrayal was crushing. The man I thought I loved was siding with the woman who had no respect for me, no regard for my feelings. It was clear now. I was nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game. "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "I will not apologize. Your mother took something of mine, and now I'm going to get it back." As the tension in the room thickened, Karen suddenly shifted her stance. She seemed to shrink into herself, as if the walls were closing in on her. Her bravado faltered, and for the first time I saw a hint of guilt on her face. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "I borrowed it." "Borrowed it?" I asked, incredulous. "You took it without asking. You didn't borrow anything. You stole it." She shifted uncomfortably. "Okay, maybe I took it," she admitted. "But it's just a watch. What's the big deal? You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I was furious. She had no concept of the value this watch held, not just in terms of money, but in sentiment. It was my grandfather's, the only thing I had left of him after he passed. I couldn't just let it go. I stared at her, resolute. "Where is it?" I asked again. "I want it back." Karen hesitated for a moment, and then, in a burst of guilt and panic, she blurted out, "I sold it." I froze. "What?" "I sold it," she repeated, looking at the ground. "I didn't think it was worth that much, but I needed the money." My heart sank. "How much did you sell it for?" $20,000, she muttered, her voice barely audible. $20,000. The amount didn't matter. It was the principle. She had stolen from me and sold something priceless for a fraction of its worth. I was sickened by her lack of remorse. "Where did you sell it?" I demanded. "Where is it?" She shook her head. "I can't give you that. It's gone. I spent most of the money already." I could feel the anger rise in me, but I kept my composure. I had a plan. "If you can't give me the money or the watch, then I'm calling the police." Karen's face drained of color. "No, please don't do that. I'll return it, I swear. Just give me a week." "A week?" I asked, my voice rising. "I can't wait a week. That watch is irreplaceable. I want it now." Karen's panic was evident. "I don't have the money to get it back. It's too late. I already spent most of it." I took a deep breath, then made my decision. I walked over to the phone and dialed the police. My hands shook as I reported the theft. I explained the situation in detail, and the dispatcher assured me that an officer would be on the way. Sam and Karen both seemed to panic, their faces turning pale. "Who are you calling?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. "Karen didn't steal anything. This is a family matter. You don't need to get the police involved." "I'm done playing games," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I've called the police. This is theft, and it's a crime." Sam and Karen's protestations fell on deaf ears. The police arrived within the hour, and after reviewing the evidence, the mess in my room, the recorded conversation, and Karen's admission, they took her into custody. Sam tried to defend her, but it was clear there was nothing he could do. I went to the pawn shop where Karen had sold the watch. There, I found the footage confirming her guilt. The watch was still there, thankfully, and I was able to retrieve it. The police added the pawn shop's records and the footage to their investigation. Karen was charged with theft, and Sam, unable to escape the fallout, had to bear the consequences of his mother's actions. My heart ached as I watched Sam, his face contorted in frustration and defeat. But as much as I felt sorrow for him, I knew I had done the right thing. His betrayal had been too much to overlook. My resolve was stronger than ever. Divorce proceedings began shortly after. Sam pleaded with me to reconsider, but it was too late. His loyalty to his mother had cost him everything. It took time, but I finally moved on. I enjoyed my freedom, my independence, and the peace that came with it. The watch was back in my possession, and I could finally say I had reclaimed my life. My future was mine to shape, and I had no intention of letting anyone take that from me again.